Well, maybe we can think of getting started. It's a bit slower today to have everybody back in the room. Okay, let's start because we have our panelists here and a good room. So thank you very much for joining this panel discussion. This panel is going to be on the sub-theme of innovation. This morning, there was another session on innovation, but it was more focused on innovation in evaluation, how we do evaluation. For this session, we take a different perspective. We will be looking at innovation as a way to achieve transformational impact. So we will be focusing also on private sector and tools that MDBs are now using to support the private sector, and what would be the role, or what is the role of evaluation in doing so, and how can we adapt our approaches and methodologies so that we are equipped and fit for purpose to evaluate innovation. So that's the key topic. That's why we called this session Are MDBs ready to promote innovation for sustainability and private sector development? Are we ready? Are we the right institutions to do that? And is evaluation ready also? Is evaluation a driving force, hopefully, or can be a driving force, but also what are the constraints and the challenges that we're facing in evaluating innovation? So for the topic itself, needless to say that MDBs are under a lot of pressure. SDGs are off track, and there is a need to really have transformational changes. And that put a lot of pressure on the private sector, of course, but also on MDBs to ensure that they are transformational, and pressure on us as evaluation departments to be able to tell the story. Are we really having some impact through some of the innovation? So to talk about it today, we will have a panel of practitioners and evaluators. Practitioners, I would say 2 practitioners and 3 evaluators. So it's only 4 people. But Faraz, I count you as both a practitioner and an evaluator. So it will be interesting to have the perspective of the private sector, or of those implementing innovation to support private sector, but also of evaluators working on it. So to discuss this, we have here with me on my left, Danielle Herson. Danielle is a senior investment specialist and a senior fund manager of ADB Venture. And ADB Venture is in itself an innovative financial tool that ADB developed. And Danielle will tell us more about it. And then next to Danielle is Faraz Kazmi. So Faraz has spent the bulk of his career in the private sector, working on infrastructure and project finance, and recently joined the Independent Evaluation Department of ADB as a senior evaluation specialist. That's why I count him in both groups of evaluators and practitioners. We have Alper, who is a principal evaluator at the Independent Evaluation Department of EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And Alper has been focusing his work recently on learning, knowledge management, climate, but also innovation. And on the very left, we have Irene Bain, if I pronounce it with the French way, who is a seasoned, more development specialist, I would say, and an evaluator. Who has a lot of experience designing, implementing, and evaluating development projects, including innovative projects, and is the head of evaluative learning at AIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So welcome, and thank you very much to all of you for being here. What I propose is to have 2 rounds of questions to the panelists, and we might also decide to interact between panelists and keep it more of a discussion. And I have to say that we had our pre-session meeting just now, and we were already into a very engaging discussion. So hopefully that's what we'll get from this. And we'd like also you to ask questions. So we will have 2 rounds, and we will ask you to ask questions at the end of each round. And so please be ready to also share your experience and ask questions. The first round will be more dedicated to sharing experience on innovative initiatives. So we'll learn also what we can learn from the private sector and from the experience of the different speakers. And then the second round will be looking more at the role of evaluation. Is that because of this setting, because of this need, and because of the importance of innovation, and it's important for MDBs to innovate, but it's also important for evaluation to innovate. Do we have the right tools to assess innovation? Are we assessing innovation the same way, or saying, what successes, are we doing it the same way we do it for other projects? What can we learn from the private sector also in this field? So I will turn to Danielle first. As the one who led the development of ADB Ventures, which is a direct venture capital investment arm of ADB. Can you tell us a bit more about this new approach and what role you see for MDBs to promote innovation, and why is it important to evaluate, even though it is private sector?
So, first of all, ADB Ventures is a very new initiative in itself. We are a startup within ADB. So we're both sort of investing in innovation, but we are in itself a bit of an innovation. We invest in early stage tech startups around the world, actually. We call it seed stage or Series A, using sort of industry terminology. But these are really early stage companies that are yet to find a very clear maybe use case. We call it product market fit. They take on significant risk in terms of both product development and market risk. Just to give a flavor of what kind of investments we do. So we were set up around 3-4 years ago. 2019, we were officially launched. 2020, we started investing. So we are still in the early stages of investing, but also learning. But why did we set up ADB Ventures? And I think, it's not a traditional type of financing that an MDB provides, but it was a recognition that innovation is critical for development, and innovation needs specialized financing tools. Cannot be the traditional tools. It needs more flexible financing, more patient financing, but also non-financial supports that bundle with it. And this is kind of a product that, at least in ADB, was not available. So we thought it was a need for MDBs to develop that product. Do we think that MDBs should drive this on its own? No, I think the MDBs has a role in supporting the existing ecosystem out there. There are other investors that know this space much better than us. But we do provide a critical role in bringing in more traditional venture capital investors into more impactful investors, startups. We do provide a role in helping professionalize some of these companies so they can absorb more institutional capital. And it's also something important for ADB itself, because we create a window towards the market of what kind of technology solutions, innovations the market is really looking for at any particular point of time. So we do think the MDB has a role, but it's more of a complementary to the other investors out there.
And tell me actually what you see the role of evaluation there.
So
you haven't been evaluated yet. It might come. It will come, I'm sure.
Yeah, I just look at
Manny, I'm sure Manny is there.
I'm sure he has the eyes on ADB Ventures.
Could be on the work program. Yeah.
No, I think evaluation is extremely important because, most people, a lot of people know MDBs here, right? Can be quite rigid structures, a lot of one size fits all. And I think, there are 2 levels of innovation for us that needs to be evaluated. Both the companies that we invest in, how do we evaluate the impact they're having, right? Impact from technology is very different from a normal infrastructure project. And the risk we're taking are very different. So how do we evaluate that within traditional or a different framework? So that's evaluation is critical for us to sort of help ADB understand that we need a different way of looking at it. And the other one is ADB Ventures itself is innovation. How does the evaluation department say, look, if you want to do something different and new, you need to assess these new initiatives differently from a more existing initiative. So we really hope that evaluation can play a role of providing that bigger picture for the organization.
Well, thank you, Daniel, and we'll come to more of how we can do it in the second round of the questions. Let me turn to Faraz now. Faraz, you were with Standard Chartered for some time. You just moved to ADB and to this new world of evaluation. Can you tell us more about what MDBs can learn from banks like yours? But also you worked on complex products and you see the role that MDB can play. Daniel just said that it's a role of not really an actor, it's more of a facilitator, supporter in a way. Do you have the same impression?
Sure. Thanks, Veronique. Hello, everyone. So, perhaps to answer the first part of your question, it's even between MDBs, there is a wide variation, and even between commercial organizations or banks, there's a variation. So perhaps some of these points are more generalizations, MDBs versus commercial organizations. But I would bring out three things that I see that MDBs could perhaps take a look at. The first one is commercial organizations often, just by design, they're in a constant state of reinvention and innovation as they're looking to grow, as they're looking to survive, as they're looking to meet their commercial objectives. And, that culture sort of moves through those commercial organizations. The urgency to get things done, the urgency to do things a little bit differently, perhaps a little bit better. Another point I feel is that commercial organizations, just the way that they're set up, tend to have a primary focus on their commercial sustainability, with, of course, a secondary focus, increasingly important, on corporate social responsibility, on environment, on other aspects as well. Whereas MDBs, it's a little bit more nuanced, because MDBs need to look at development impact. They need to look at, the financial sustainability of the particular business. They also need to look at various other metrics. And so if you are a practitioner in a commercial organization, perhaps it's a little bit easier to be more focused on what you're looking to do. And the third point I would make is that, and again, based on one of the evaluations that we've done recently, there's a variation amongst the MDBs on this metric, but commercial organizations, especially the larger ones, tend to track performance quite well. They have systems in place, they have diverse KPIs, they quantify things, and then they track the performance. Now, that's something that certain MDBs, in our limited experience, do a little bit better than others, but probably that is something that could be developed. So to summarize that, if MDBs can give their operational teams clarity in terms of vision, clarity in terms of a sense of urgency perhaps through KPIs, and then track that performance more robustly, it should help drive things like innovation and better performance.
Well, thank you very much, Faraz. I will come back to your second point and the fact that, of course, in commercial banks or in the private sector, there was less of a need to evaluate or to measure success in a way. Is that changing because of external pressure, maybe, or because there is now also for impact funds and for some of the investment, there is more scrutiny from clients or from the public? Is that happening?
It's certainly, in my experience, it certainly has been happening and is gathering pace. I mean, on the environmental side, on social metrics, on gender metrics and things like that. But I do feel that the primary purpose, particularly amongst the financial institutions or banks, is commercial success, but also, yes, taking these things into account.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll turn to you, Alper. You are an evaluator. You've been focusing recently on a series of evaluation where you looked at the way the bank EBRD was supporting innovation in private sector. And one of the last evaluations that you presented was on the venture capital investment program, which we call VCIP. You also worked on other evaluations like PPPs in Turkey or learning and knowledge management. But I'd like you to give us some key insights from these evaluations and maybe go a little bit more into the example of the VCIP.
Thank you very much. It's essentially the venture capital investment program is launched in 2011, so it is indeed older than ADB Ventures, but essentially it is the same product. It's a direct venture capital investment instrument. And the bank started to experiment with that in the last decade. And then we did the evaluation of that work. I think from that, I would like to maybe highlight one really pain point and about like a challenge that we faced. And it is also partially already reflected by Daniel, I believe. I mean, innovation is fast. It happens very quickly. And the innovators, those companies, they have to be very adaptive. If they are not adaptive, they die. This is why it is the way MDBs traditionally operate. It needs to change if they really want to be functional in that space. And evaluation, as already mentioned, it's an MDB function primarily. We also, I mean, we are not as fast as what the venture capital ecosystem really requires. So that was like a major bottleneck for us to proceed with the evaluation and then to resolve all those issues. This is why it required a lot of engagement with management, a lot of communication to address those issues, and then simply to remove the perception of evaluation being a burden. Only after that, and then only in agreement with management, we kickstarted data collection. We did our best to keep it as light as possible because these companies were really very small. They didn't have much capacity to report data. For some of them, they didn't have like enough bandwidth to really understand what our objectives are or what type of data they need to provide. This is why we also complemented our work with other tools as well, but on that bit I will come in speak in the second part. So that was, I think that is something really fundamentally different of how evaluation systems work at MDBs. And in that sense, Daniel is perfectly right saying that it is one size does not fit all. On the bit that his point about rigidity, I think this is, I would like to take it much more about that being disciplined and structured. I think it has a positive aspect as well. And I think we can be fast by being disciplined and structured as well. And I believe to a certain extent we managed to achieve that in our evaluation. The other bit, I just want to make a maybe connection with what Farah says as well about the KPIs and the richness of KPIs in private sector. And I would like to speak about that because indeed we have identified another pain point in our learning and knowledge management evaluation within EBRD. What we basically see in that evaluation was that the bank has some like 160 different data frames, siloed, separated from each other. And each data frame itself has certain KPIs for certain individuals or teams, not coordinated. Indeed, in that sense, it is what we have within EBRD in terms of data and KPIs is, in my opinion, at least as rich as HSBC, let's say. I also worked at HSBC for 2 years, but it is not managed as it is managed as HSBC. So in that sense, that's also how we manage data. That rich data is something very critical, and it's a pain point for us to innovate within the bank, I believe, and that's all.
Well, thank you very much. And actually, management of data has been definitely an issue. It's not just for this evaluation, but across. But specifically for evaluation of innovation, it's really important also to know what indicators are going to be taken and how we measure, how we define success, because innovation by definition is to try things, to fail and to try again and then to succeed, and then it's a process. And for evaluators, it's very difficult, because it's a moving target and it's also measuring failure as part of the success in a way. Did you find that as a challenge in a way in your evaluation?
It was a challenge, but it was also a very good experience for us. It's also learning for myself and for my co-author Oscar about how to measure innovation. The good thing was that our management counterparts, they had an intention to measure innovation in the first place. So we had a good starting point. But obviously, I mean, because of the problems that I've mentioned, we didn't have credible, concrete data to validate those claims. And then we did our own research about how we can measure innovation at the project level or within a portfolio. We come up with like a set of indicators, and then that is recommended as part of our evaluation. I think is that. That's all I can say, I guess.
And I think we can come back to that in the second round also when we talk about challenges. So I'll turn to you, Irene, and you are from the AIB, which is kind of the new kid on the block and among MDBs, but right from the beginning, focusing on support to infrastructure, but also private sector and innovative approaches. So in your area of evaluation, what have been the evaluation practices that you've been putting ahead to promote innovation in AIB?
Thank you very much. As Veronique said, we're a bank that programs both sovereign-backed financing and non-sovereign-backed financing. So when we developed our learning and evaluation policy, we actually surveyed both private sector and looked at other MDBs with sovereign-backed financing programs. And we also looked at NGOs because we saw that within philanthropy, impact investment was also growing. And it was very interesting when you look across the field, you sometimes find that we, the banks, are not perhaps the most innovative. And talking to lawyers working on various systems of jurisdictions that are coming through, and we may touch on this later, there's quite a lot happening that means you need to raise your eyes above the parapet. But what I would like to do first is situate two quotes and then give you two examples very briefly of how we're working on them. Forgive me if I put on my glasses and read because I want to get the wording right. They're both OECD DAC manuals. The first, the 2015 Frascati manual, it's the internationally recognized methodology for collecting and using R&D statistics. And why it's useful for this discussion is because it has 5 criteria for innovation. That the activity be novel, creative, uncertain, hold on to that idea, uncertain, systemic, and transferable or reproducible. The second one is a more recent OECD DAC manual from 2018, the Oslo Manual, and its guidelines for collecting and reporting on using data on innovation. And what it says, and I quote, is, "What is innovation and how should it be measured?" It particularly notes that innovation is based on a learning process that draws on multiple inputs and requires ongoing problem solving. And so it's important to note both of these manuals are talking about intentional learning, that your innovation is an intention to do something different. It may not be different in the whole field, it may be just different for your organization, but it's intentional. And of its nature, that means it carries uncertainty and risk. And so it needs consistent risk management because, as we all know, innovation is the result of something. The verb is to innovate. But until you get the result and decide it's successful, what you're actually talking about is risk management. And I'll come back to that in the 2 examples I want to give you now. Because as you know, we're a new bank. We don't have post-evaluations, independent post-evaluations yet of our projects because they're just coming to fruition. So what we've done is perhaps a very Chinese idea. It's called borrowing the stones from other people's mountains. And what that means is we developed an idea of practitioner dialogues that we narrowcast within the bank. We don't invite everyone to come. Only the people who are operationally facing on that issue are invited to come. So it's a bit of social marketing. People feel, oh, I was invited, not everyone got it, I'll come along and listen. We invite speakers from peer MDBs to talk on the areas that we want to innovate in, about their evaluations and what they found, because it takes the heat out of innovation. You're hearing about somebody else's innovation. If it worked or not worked, you're not sitting there feeling it's stamped on the middle of my head. And so when we look at things like results-based lending, policy-based lending, that are not new in the field, but they're going to be new for us, and they carry substantial risks of getting it wrong, then we want to get the ideas early. And what this also does is socialize an idea about learning and evaluation before you start a project, so that people build it in from the start. It's not us coming at the end to say, oh, and by the way, we forgot to tell you, you're going to be evaluated. The other one very quickly that we've done in our independent post-evaluation, we have set OECD DAC criteria plus a criteria for bank work quality that we select from. We will give a rating to the individual criteria, but no overall rating to the project. So your project will not be highly successful or highly unsuccessful. Parts of your project may be. And why is that important when we're thinking about innovation? There may be parts of it that don't get a good rating, but if you have made a huge effort to responsibly manage the risk, but perhaps you still failed, but you generated lots of useful lessons that let the next innovation go to success. So your cell in the body was not as healthy as the others, but the body can grow. You will get a good rating on bank work quality, even that your rating on efficiency or effectiveness may not have been so high. It's an experiment. We're going to pilot it. Watch the space. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's fascinating, and that's going to be developed also in the second chart. So I think that with this, we've come from ADB Venture, an example, and slowly go towards evaluation. So maybe at this stage we can already stop and take your questions before we go to the second role, where we will really focus on evaluation, the role of evaluation. But already from what you said, Irene, we can see there is space for evaluation, especially if the focus is on the learning aspect of it. Any questions? Yes? If you can just maybe identify yourself and...
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We heard you, don't worry. Any other questions? Or maybe we can get started on that, and that's definitely for you, Daniel, to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually a lot of us have the similar learnings around how do you become, more agile and responsive. And, when we said, I came from venture capital industry, I came from outside ADB. I've been working venture capital for the last 15 plus years. And somehow I had this naive idea that we can do it in ADB, right? Just to show like what it took for us just to set it up and how much innovation we had to do on the ADB side. First of all, we decided to raise our capital from outside ADB. We recognize if we take ADB capital, we'll be constrained by some of the existing policies. So that was a major innovation itself. We had to go out fundraise with LPs and so on, which, is traditionally not an ADB kind of activity. But that's one way to create more ring-fenced capital, but also allow us some more flexibility. We create an external investment committee that understands the nature of these investments. So we can move fast, understand the trade-offs, what's material risk, what is not material risk. These are leading venture capitalists from Asia that now sit on our investment committee. But without that, I don't think we might have the credibility in the industry, but also we wouldn't be able to evaluate investment quickly enough. We had to create our own processes. there's this view maybe that innovation means less processes, but actually I think we have more processes than in other part of, well, than many other parts of ADB, but at different processes. We have an extremely well-functioning CRM system. I mean, everyone has tried to implement CRM. Very few people use it. We use it daily. Every year we assess 2,000 companies. We have very clear stage cases. It's very process-driven, but it's different type of processes. And then we had to hire a team of people who came from outside, from venture capital industry, former entrepreneurs who understand, because it's an extremely client-centric business. If you want to do venture capital, you need to understand what an entrepreneur needs. And you need to be their friends, right? That's how it works. So we had to do all of that, and we had to challenge ADB system, all of that. So you need both protection for that, but also patience to get there. And these people that we have in ADB Ventures are not, I would say, traditional ADB kind of CVs, which means that they need career protection, for example. There's a lot of small things that you need to make this work. We constantly fight in this battle around protecting that space so we can be sufficiently agile and market-centric to meet the needs of the market. And that's personally what I think all these evaluators here. I mean, some of the best conversations we had in ADB around understanding the bigger picture, patience, is with people from our own evaluation department. Because I think that's where people see what goes on in an organization, right? So, yeah, it takes a lot.
Thank you. Maybe, Alper, you can relate to what Daniel just said, because that's something that we also found in the VCIP evaluation.
Yes, it is. It's maybe I can speak about how evaluation helped EBRD to learn from its own venture capital investment program. Essentially, the processes that ADB Ventures put in place wasn't in place in 2011 at the EBRD when we launched the program. So we didn't have a project selection process in place which was suitable for venture capital investment. Initially, the bank EBRD tried to use its own internal processes for project selection and then approval. This is why for 3 years we couldn't do many deals. So we couldn't disperse, the program wasn't active. And then it is the program put in place this externally advisory committee, which essentially is the committee that Daniel refers as well. It is, and that was in place, I think around like 2013, and then they simplified the procedures, they created new procedures, and then they started to invest in principle in alignment with market practice. The problem was there is, and till the evaluation, the only problem in my opinion was that was very much isolated from the rest of the bank. So although this was like a window opening to future, like looking at like future products, like innovation, the rest of the bank couldn't learn from it. So now with the evaluation itself, we basically managed to unpack the whole system, and we managed to demonstrate that both to the rest of the bank as well as board. So now it is a restructuring is happening within the bank so that all those practices, whatever good there is, could be integrated to other departments where suitable. So in that sense, I think our role has been really very beneficial for the institution. But I also believe that also speaks to the risk management element that Irene mentioned, because risk management is fundamentally different in venture capital team. But indeed, the whole rest of the whole equity department, which is much larger than VC side, could learn a lot from it. And until our evaluation, that was much more of a black box. So we managed to basically transfer that information. It is. So I guess.
Yeah, thank you very much. Irene or Faraz, you want to react to this question also? And maybe there are other questions that we'll take afterwards. No, you want to react first? Okay, so we'll take another question then.
Thank you very much. Aaron Gerben from the European Investment Bank. My question is about to what extent the rationale and also the success of MDB's intervention in terms of innovation depend on the geographical and economic context. I mean, innovation is an important driver of growth in developed economies where we are at the technological frontier. but for developing world, isn't there a lot of low-hanging fruits there to harvest from adaptation? And also, when it comes to venture capital and these kind of instruments, a certain level of financial market development is necessary to make this function. So do you have some thoughts about where are the geographies and how much it depends on the economic context, whether MDBs should engage into supporting innovation in a certain country or area?
Thank you very much. Yes, the context is very important, and also the type of innovation and the level of innovation would vary, of course, depending on the environment, maybe the capacity also of the private sector, the financial system, and all of the ecosystem also. Who would like to have a try on that? And Faraz, maybe you had some experience in different countries. Can you tell us more about developing ones?
No, I guess I was looking to make a broader point that, even if there is low-hanging fruit and things are different, somebody still needs to capitalize on it. That somebody has to be there to identify, evaluate, and make those investments. But absolutely agree with the broader point that, yes, it does change. Venture capital changes from geography to geography.
Irene?
I think just to add to that, when we think about innovation, it's important to think about the scale we're looking at. You're absolutely right that it may not be innovative at a global scale, but it's still an innovation within that context because the nature of contexts being different. And something we see in the sovereign sector that perhaps still has relevance, that when we look at some countries that don't, or economies that don't want to borrow or need to borrow anymore for the money, but they're looking to MDBs to carry the political risk of innovation. I don't know to what degree that extends across from the sovereign to the non-sovereign sector, particularly if you're perhaps building TA for upstream things that need to occur to create space for an innovation to come in. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe also, well, in a way, development is innovation and has been for decades, sometimes working less, but it has been also transfer of technology, transfer of know-how, and that is happening in all types of countries. Ricardo?
It will be louder like this. So in the previous session, Patricia talked about systematization as a key component of innovation or a way of doing innovation you need to systematize. To what extent is systematization done across the different banks and especially jointly together?
You mean systematization of the approach to support innovation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Towards what is being innovated, how can we replicate innovation, what are the lessons learned, how can we take it forward, how can we expand certain areas, how can we learn from each other, and then to draw what kind of level of investments are needed to take that forward.
Thank you. I'll take the second question also and just...
Since I'm in the neighborhood, I'll ask a question too. And it relates to the earlier one that was asked. To what extent is market failure the issue that you're trying to address? What are the market failures, and to what extent do the efforts to support innovation and venture capital address the root causes of those market failures? I think that gets to sort of the heart of the economic issues that are here. Be interesting to hear your views.
And you would talk of market failure of the financial system in that case, or
I asked, what are the
more
market
general?
failures? There are many sources, but yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So one question on systemization. Maybe we'll first talk about the second question, because the second question is about more why we're doing it, and then the second one would be more how we are sharing experience. So who would like to start on?
I can try. Yes, if so. I mean, about the market
You have to innovate and take risks. So
yeah. Okay. So just the argumentation that EBRD management made in terms of like market failure was almost solely financing gap. So essentially, they claim that in a number of markets that we operate, there are a bunch of innovative entrepreneurs and they are not able to access capital at all. Then in the evaluation itself, with data, we managed to validate that. Indeed, especially in the early phases of the venture capital investment program, as an institutional investor, EBRD was all by yourself. There weren't a single competitor in the market. So in that sense, at least that observation that we had was like consistent with EBRD management's argument. And in that sense, I believe them. I believe that there was a financing gap, Eastern Europe, Turkey, Russia at that point in time, while EBRD was still investing in Russia. But it is, again, this is my personal opinion based on the readings that I did during the evaluation, but I believe also there are like fundamental issues related to policy in terms of entrepreneurship as well. One of them that we see in the EBRD region is, for instance, intellectual property rights. So these are like innovators, they innovate, like especially like we don't see much startups in hardware, for instance. It is, if you want to invest in, this is an example, if you want to have like a startup focusing on hardware in Turkey, it is better to move to US and then have like proper intellectual property protection and then attract capital there. So it is, in EBRD, we are not addressing that policy element at this point in time. We are only addressing the financing gap element. About the systematization, it's, in my opinion, there isn't a cohesive approach. I mean, in the markets that we operate, indeed, if there is an other like comparable program from a bilateral or multilateral institution, we are in competition. So it is not cooperation. But it allows, this is a space where I think a lot can be systematized. I think how we can measure innovation at the project level is not something very challenging, but I think even our like board is not aware of that. They still believe that innovation is an elusive concept, hard to capture. In my opinion, it is not. I think we have like a very good understanding of how innovation occurs through that entrepreneurs and how it could be monitored, tracked. In that sense, I think there is a lot of potential, but I think there is no, at this point in time, coordination, or I don't also see any kind of intention for coordination as well. I hope these are satisfactory answers.
So maybe Faraz, and then you can talk about this tension that Alpe is raising about the need for cooperation and yet the competition.
Sure. But perhaps to come at the systemization point a little bit differently. Yes, by definition, what we're talking about is innovation, which means new things that people need to think through and then sort of work forward. So both for the operational side, perhaps systems will come into place over time. And then from putting on the evaluator hat, as the evaluation departments come to terms with the broader topic we were discussing, which is, how do you evaluate these innovative things? Perhaps you don't necessarily evaluate, on an individual basis. Perhaps a portfolio view needs to be taken to address the fact that certain things will inevitably fail. So, the systemization perhaps will follow by definition because it is something new and innovative.
Yes, Daniel?
Yes, and I don't want to, I can speak around the whole market failure. There's a lot on innovation, but I guess we're talking about evaluation as well. But I think, first of all, it's not all about technology. A lot of things is around business model innovation, partnership innovation, process innovation. There's a lot of inefficiencies in Asia that can be solved by combination of these things. So it's not necessarily the same type of innovation, but the more inefficiency you have, the more opportunities to do things differently. So I think there's no shortage of the need for innovation. It might just look different in Asia. The other thing is, I generally believe that there is, from a market failure point of view, there is a lot of capital in Asia. I don't think the world generally, at least in Asia, even for startups, there's a significant financing gap. There is, but that's not the major problem, I think. The major problem is that to be an entrepreneur is extremely risky. It's an extremely bad investment on your life, generally speaking, to be a tech entrepreneur in Asia. You'd put several years in, usually highly educated people, and they put maybe 5, 6 of the best years to do something. They bootstrap themselves. They might, both from a social and financial point of view, they're putting their life at risk, which is not well understood, the risk they're taking. And so what I think is the market failure is the ability to support and de-risk these entrepreneurs, which requires a combination of the right capital, but with the right support. The right support without the right capital is no skin in the game. But fundamentally, I think the failure is we're not making life easy for entrepreneurs to be entrepreneurs. On the MDB things, I really appreciate EBRD reaching out as part of their product evaluating. I learned so much from EBRD, and I learned from IFC, from others. And that's been extremely useful. When we designed ADB Ventures, we took all those learnings into account. I mean, we missed a few things because we didn't have experience. We're still learning. But we are able to build on all those experience from IFC, EBRD, but also from the private sector out there. So I would really welcome maybe a group that work. I mean, a practitioners group within MDB, just comparing notes around, how we can do things better as supporting innovation. And it's also nice to know you're not alone, right?
Well, thank you very much. Irene, do you want to come in? And then we'll go to the second round.
I think just very briefly on jointness, and I agree with what Daniel said just then, at least for the MDBs that are working both in the sovereign and non-sovereign space. I think we haven't grappled well enough with the private sector. We've come in under the call for blended finance to put our shoulders to the task, but we're still coming with, in many cases, a sovereign lens. Now, that is not necessarily a bad thing because our social and environmental safeguards comes out of that system, many of our other anti-corruption processes and so forth. But thinking deeply about what's common between the two sides of the coin for those banks which have both, and how they can fertilize each other. Recently, I'll give you an example. We, together with our legal department, had a practitioner dialogue on the issue of greenwashing, and that very interestingly, looking at what's shifting in the legislative space around the sort of agreements that you're maybe familiar with, the Equator Principles for the private sector. You can see a rising wave, particularly in the European jurisdiction, that is going to require companies of the nature of their existing to disclose certain information, whether they've had complaints against them from project-affected people, to disclose information about how to make complaints, to disclose more environmental information. And that is going to have the hard incentive of being legally binding. Whereas in the sovereign space, we do a lot of training, a lot of extension of our environmental and social policy. In some cases, as somebody touched on earlier, the private sector leapfrogs and brings in, Daniel may want to speak to this briefly, brings in hard and binding requirements that will actually help our sovereign financing areas, perhaps even to move forward in the evaluations of those policies.
Thank you. Yes, and that's really important because when we conduct evaluation of the private sector, and that's really the bread and butter of our work in the EBRD, very often what we hear from our colleagues, the bankers, we call them in the bank, is that clients are not interested in collecting data, that they're not interested in evaluation, or that they're not capable in a way, they don't have the structure to collect the data and reflect on the impact they're having. And that may be true for some instances, but I think it's a speech that we need to change because it's not necessarily true, and we need to hear it directly from the private sector. And that really is a good transition to the second round, because in the second round of questions, we will focus more on the role of evaluation. Of course, evaluation for innovation cannot be business as usual. We need to adapt. We need to be equipped to understand what we measure when we measure evaluation. Like we measure, for example, this responsibility to try, but also the right to fail, and how is that appreciated as a successful element? And for this round, I will ask all of you to reflect on the role of evaluation from different perspectives. So I first turn to you, Danielle, and as a user, you're not an evaluator, but you hopefully will be using. You may be an evaluee, evaluate first, and then you will be using the findings from evaluation. But what is your perspective about evaluation? You are in an institution where there is an independent evaluation department, so pretty sure that in a few years from now there will be an evaluation of the work. Is it something that you are dreading? Is it something that you would embrace? And maybe also what would be the key messages you'd like to give to the evaluators?
I mean, we are still in early days, so I guess at some point we'll be evaluated. But what I would like actually is evaluation to get involved earlier in design of these things, because the learnings from previous evaluations or from other MDBs and so on is critical how we design these projects. But and also that's how we get protection potentially, like saying maybe ADB Ventures should be evaluated this in the future. So it's not just becomes looking back and ex post kind of evaluation, but it's actually a more strategic partnership around what should be the KPIs, what should be the frame within ADB Ventures should be evaluated. So I think that's more of a partnership that I think will be really valuable rather than a one-off evaluation, because this kind of misses the collective experience that I do think exists within the evaluation community. And just one last thing, I think just picking up on that impact. I mean, I think the private sector is moving really fast around understanding impact and methodologies, new ways of, even in real time measuring impact. I mean, there's a significant risk, I think, that ADB Ventures, maybe the MDBs more generally, becomes an impact laggard. And of course, I think that would be unfortunate given that development is kind of part of, it's what says on the, right? It says in the name, right? So I think there's something really important on making sure that the impact framework is at the forefront and not, lagging what the industry is doing.
I'll then come to you, Faraz, but I will go first to Alpa, because you have evaluated VCIP, as you mentioned earlier. So maybe you can share the experience also of how it was perceived by the evaluees, and also what challenges you faced in measuring this transformational impact element.
We conducted the evaluation in 4 months, but before basically kickstarting it, we had in communication with management for about maybe 5 months. So the whole process was like 5 plus 4, 9 months. So indeed, having that communication with management and then getting establishing the right, let's say, protocol for communication with the clients and the co-investors, it took a lot of time, and to me that was new, and that was a fundamental challenge. Overall, I think, especially at the onset of the evaluation, we have been perceived as EBRD bureaucracy and lots of additional burden for the small companies that we are investing in, and a potential threat or a disruption for EBRD's business. With continuous engagement, we address those problems. But I felt through that period that was really extreme. I do not think that will happen again. This is why I agree what Daniel said, that this is the standard evaluation framework needs some kind of adjustment for venture capital settings. So it is, but in terms of capturing the systemic impact on innovation, I think one thing is that, there is this tools that Irene mentioned. There are standard tools to look at what type of indicators are available. And there you will see that, okay, if you want to talk about innovation, look at if the company has, or the founder of the company, do they have any scientific publications? Do they have any kind of linkages to academy, for instance? Do they have patents, or patents in what fields? But I mean, during the evaluation, though, we realized that on the field especially, when companies or investors refer to innovation, it is one thing is about this innovation of business models, that's again, Danielle mentioned, but other than that, there was this very heavy emphasis on serial entrepreneurship. So it is essentially how the spirit of entrepreneurship is it is contagious. So, and then there are certain individuals that carry that spirit across the ecosystem, and then they create lots of spin-offs. And with the data itself, we are focusing on Poland and Turkey. Indeed, we have seen that the companies that we have invested indeed created lots of innovations with their sister or brother companies, I would say. They had many graduates, especially maybe you know about Trendyol is one example, for instance. It's a Turkish e-commerce platform, then acquired by Alibaba. That company, it had, I guess, like 64 graduates. When I say graduate, former employees, who then went on, established their own companies and raised like capital, which is like 20 times more than what Trendyol raised. So, and these are like on the scale of billions. So it is on the field, when people refer to innovation, that was the angle they had. They didn't care about like patents or scientific publications. So that information itself, we managed to use in the evaluation itself, and then we managed to document those spin-offs. And then that was, I think, that managed to this systemic impact that we create, at least in a number of markets that we operated. But again, but this wasn't the case for each market. In others, nothing happened. But in some, with like a small investment in startups, we managed to create a lot. So I think that's all.
Well, thank you very much. And the very important point that you highlighted, Alper, is how when you first reached out to the team, it was not very well received. So we have Danielle here, who is already on board and has more of maybe a learning culture. It's not a given. So you have to understand that it could be perceived as you said, a burden from the institution. And one of the reaction was like, we are working with entrepreneurs, we're working with the private sector. They won't understand why EBRD is having an independent evaluation, or it would be perceived as being this administrative burden. We, internally, I remember this discussion we had at that time, we were convinced that it was not the case, but it's only after being able and pushing back and being able to interview the clients that our colleagues came to the realization that actually it was perceived quite well by the clients, because the clients welcome the fact that an institution like EBRD will come to them and ask them what worked well, what didn't work well, how can we improve. So we have, as evaluators, to push back when we have our colleagues telling us, oh, it's private sector, it's private companies and clients, they really don't care about evaluation, and it could be a reputational risk to have an evaluation. Not so, and it's for us to really push back and fight against that. Now I will turn to you, Faraz, because you say you have those two hats, and now that you are in the evaluation field, maybe you can tell us more how evaluation can be useful to the private sector, and maybe give us some elements of how to approach it to make it useful.
Well, perhaps, I mean, that's quite a broad aspect.
Make it as focused as you want.
How it could be useful to the private sector. But, while certainly the private sector doesn't necessarily have specific evaluation departments, but I think that broader role is played overall, perhaps more so by senior management and the way that the overall organizations are set up, to the extent it's possible for senior management to play that role. But more broadly, an independent, objective viewpoint would be welcome in any organization. So, whether it's through a specific department or whether it's through other structures in the organization, I think, private sectors, like everyone, could could benefit from that. But I also did want to build a little bit on what we were discussing just before, which was around how you evaluate innovation. And just to set Daniel's mind at ease a little bit, I think there's a few things that we can do, right? For one, we always do discuss a lot with the evaluees, right? How things should be different, so these thoughts can be captured. We could take, certain aspects, for instance, the demonstration effect of that particular intervention, or we could weight development impact higher depending on what the intervention is. Like Irene was saying, learnings and how they contribute more broadly could be taken into account. And also, if projects are failing individually, they could be viewed, or probably should be viewed, from a broader portfolio perspective. So, probably the same tool set, but applied a little bit differently with different weightages.
Thank you, and I'll turn to you, Irene, because you were innovative yourself in creating the evaluation unit in RIB, and trying to nurture evaluative thinking. So, can you tell us more about that, and how maybe you try to strengthen this evaluation culture, especially around innovation?
Well, we're a new bank. It even took us some time to realize we weren't a blank sheet of paper, because everyone who joined our bank came from somewhere else. And so one of the first things I realized was my role mightn't be so much about promoting learning as de-learning, because when I'd speak to people in the corridors about evaluation, from some people I might as well have said the Black Death. They were backing away from me, and what's your name, because I never want to meet you in the canteen. And I thought, oh goodness, this is tough. So when we came to make our learning and evaluation policy, and some of you, forgive me if some of you were in our earlier talk yesterday, we added some quite important wording. We talked, number one, about mutual learning, that we didn't have all the answers, we weren't investigators, but we were coming with another set of eyes to hopefully be helpful. That was one. A second one was, we said that learning and evaluation are bank-wide responsibilities with shared but distinct roles. And so everyone was doing it. No one could say it's not me and I'm not responsible. And so then the next challenge we encountered was, we had one more thing that we put in our evaluation principles. The first 6 are the same as all the other MDBs, but we specifically added a 7th one for collegial engagement. Now, just having the words there doesn't entirely take away the fear, and sometimes we have to give hard messages, and you watch people's faces, and maybe it's like Sigmund Freud said, the little child with the report card in school, and I wanted 5 gold stars, comes out trembling, and it's really hard to take that off the table. So the very first thing we did around building a culture before we come to the post-evaluation was, and I hope you've all had a chance to pick up one, we used the OECD DAC evaluation criteria underpinned by our own criteria of bank work quality. So when I train in the bank, that we have a bank-wide training program twice a year for new staff, and then an advanced level for staff who've done the initial training. I use this card and say, everybody, let's go term by term and consider in the bank, how do you, whether you're public or private sector, how do you consider relevance? How do you consider coherence, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, sustainability, and bank work quality? And to say, the reason we're thinking about it now is for 2 aspects. One, because we will talk to you about evaluability, And if what you've designed isn't evaluable, you've got a problem. But that problem isn't because of us. It's because you're not able to tell a clear story about what you're trying to do, because still the money you're spending on private sector projects still may be public money. And because we're public institutions, we're accountable for that. Also, we find it's helpful to deal with an ongoing challenge that private sector people in many banks, and particularly our bank because it's new, are under enormous pressure to get money out the door. And learning can be seen as a luxury. And so the work that I'm doing with HR around recognition and awards is essential, because if you're going to be intentionally innovative, and this is where we haven't succeeded so far, it's a long-term challenge. If your project is going to be intentionally innovative, how did you build in a learning plan at the start that walks along the road with you? Do you need somebody else embedded in your team? Or do you have the time to do it yourself? In our bank, because we're very client-oriented, it may be the client who has to do that. Have you put that in the legal agreement? Is it understood what will be collected, how it will be discussed? And I think that is a big area for all of us to grapple with. We all say to our boards when projects go for approval, yes, we will learn, but we don't put in anything in place to carry the learning. There are no donkeys walking along the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. And this is a broader question, a way to, for across, not just for innovation, but across all of the projects. How do we really embed the learning element, and how do we make sure that evaluation is part of the learning, but not the full picture, of course. Before I open the floor to questions from the audience, I would like to ask a question, and if any of you would like to answer, is what would you suggest would be the area to focus on to look at innovation and how MDBs are supporting innovation, and maybe the main risk? One that I can see is the risk that evaluation using its toolkit will not be well equipped to understand to measure the risk and appreciate the risk as part of the success. But any word of caution that you may have, maybe from the two practitioners, but maybe Alpe and Irene, if you have any idea on that. Is that a difficult question? I didn't mean to be.
I mean, it is within the venture capital ecosystem, there are different points there are different chains of steps of financing. So now at this point in time, for the countries we operate, I think markets are very mature. So it is, I think, in terms of marginal value to development impact, I think we have to focus much more on programs that are seed or maybe pre-seed stage rather than Series A, much more concessionality, maybe with blended finance. It is trying to be commercial. I think it's our focus. It could be much more impactful at that stage. It's, I mean, obviously the risk there is that it is, while using this tools of blended finance or concessionality, it again, it slows down the process. We have to deal with internal approval processes in order to mobilize that financing, and then it will nearly not fit well with operations that are in pre-seed or seed stage. So, but it's.
Well, maybe we can hear from practitioners. Which area would you like to see findings from evaluation that could really help you, including maybe on a more ongoing basis?
I mean, it's a bit tricky, but I think one thing is that the market is out there, and we're serving customers in the market. I think there's a lot of information from how the market perceives us that should be part of evaluation. I mean, if we're selling something that customer-centric, why not talk to co-investors? And I think startups has to be managed appropriately, but I think it can be done. I think getting that market signal should be a key part of evaluation. And then sometimes it's not quantitative, right? A lot of it's qualitative, bringing in people that assess. I mean, from the corporate world, you tend to have groups that assess whether a project is innovative or not. Not everything can be measured in KPIs. And that should be okay, I think. And the final point is, it's okay not to know exactly what evaluation will look for something that's still evolving. Because just like it's okay to know not exactly what a product a startup is selling. You might not know after 2-3 years. The same goes for some of these initiatives. We don't know exactly what our product and our value add will be. But it doesn't mean it will not be a value add. So I think it's okay to have some flexibility built into the system.
Thank you very much. Faraz, do you want to add something on that?
Well, perhaps just one quick point and this may be true for all evaluations, but whoever is taking a look at something innovative like venture capital should have an appreciation of private sector operations and how these businesses work, because that would also be key to the evaluation.
So IED is very lucky to have you, because you have that perspective, and you'll be then credible. But that's a very important point. I'm not saying that to flatter you. It's true that it's important to also have evaluators who are credible, because they will understand what they are evaluating. So it's not that easy. Alpa?
I just forgot to mention one, in my opinion, a critical risk that we have partially evaluated is the implementation of environmental and social performance requirements in venture capital. And then it is, I mean, for instance, we are investing in a software platform that matches patients with doctors. And all that information is highly confidential. And then all that information, I mean, we are operating in, again, Eastern European markets, so these are subject to GDPR. It is to what extent these small companies are able to apply those rules. And then it's same for AI, and then how these companies are using AI data. Is this really in alignment with GDPR? I think Sven mentioned that today as well. It's for the evaluation that we did, this wasn't a problem. One thing is also labor issues as well. Indeed, we in our evaluation we see that it's these companies again. They start very small. At the time we invest in these companies, they have 30-40 people. But at the time when I do the evaluation, it has 12,000 employees and 5,000 subcontractors. I mean, these two companies are fundamentally subject to fundamentally different environmental and social performance requirements. So at what point, how we need to basically make that switch. So this is why I think, for instance, one thing is that this board representation, and then being able to monitor the company at the board level is something critical. So this is why I think that shouldn't be given away, for instance.
Well, that's very important, because it can be also the additionality of MDBs doing it. It's to ensure that there is also corporate social responsibilities, environmental rules that are applied, and that's the demonstration effect. And that's where actually there is a role for MDBs. Irene, would you like to add something on that?
I think there was a question that we didn't entirely address, and now is actually a better time maybe to talk about it. And it was Ricardo's question around jointness and joining up. Do we do joint evaluations? I've been thinking recently a lot around joint evaluations, and the traditional definition is that you go together to do the evaluation. Increasingly, what I hear from the COVID coalition is perhaps we should unpack the idea of jointness and to say what parts of evaluation benefit from jointness. And I was thinking, from the past AEWs I've attended, this may be the first non-sovereign panel that I can recall, and it goes to Daniel's point. Where does non-sovereign get a voice and be part of the dialogue of evaluations. I've tended to assume they were too busy getting money out the door or they worked in an entirely different way. But if we're to do blended finance, shouldn't we be having this dialogue together? And that's what I notice, that more and more I hear evaluations of green bonds, we had a very interesting practitioner dialogue on energy efficiency. And you realize if all the behavioral change is with small businesses and households, it's extremely hard for governments to do. And more of those things where you need people who work primarily in the private sector in the same room thinking about the issue. I'm not sure if we've done that well enough yet. So I would wish to congratulate EBRD on the vision of this panel to bring private sector into the room.
Well, thank you. I think it's, others may have started to do that too, but it's definitely something that we need to continue to do, and including inside our own institutions. And maybe we have 10 more minutes. Could we turn to the floor for questions? We have 2. Okay, please.
Left back there.
Thank you. Sven Harten from Deval, Germany. Thanks, fascinating panel, and I mean, definitely agree with your final remarks on non-sovereign. And I really liked, we talked about the why, which market failures we're addressing, lots of interesting thoughts about the how. What I'm still a bit grappling with is in which direction. So what impacts are we looking at? And the past years, I've been working a lot on climate change, and Alpa, we shared a couple of panels together, and there the concept of transformation is central. Sometimes it's just transition, but transformation. So I guess my question is a bit twofold, and Veronique, you talked about evaluation no longer business as usual, right? And also the question what area to focus evaluations on. So my question, I think, twofold. One, for the evaluator is, to what extent does transformation play a role as a concept? So do we innovate towards achieving transformation? And then for the practitioners, especially with venture capital, I mean, I'm assuming, and I know from a different life in the past that from venture capital, from working with private firms, I mean, there you see transformation, you see transformational impact. So what would be your message as a practitioner to evaluators? So how can we learn from your experience to see where might be transformational practices emerge? So do you have sort of the magic recipe for us to identify where might be those transformational experiences that we want to look at? Thank you.
Thank you, Sven. And yeah, the question is closed.
Yeah, very interesting discussion actually. I'm Ibrahim from the Supreme Audit Institution of the Maldives. I'm Assistant Auditor General there. It's very interesting, in fact, when Alpe was talking about, sustainability. But Daniel, when you mention about, the venture capital usually starts with smaller businesses like SMEs, yeah? I'm wondering how far the products of the banks across AIB, EBRD, yeah, and ADB as well, and others too, how far, the products of these banks take into account ESG, which is the cliche of the day, yeah? Plus, also, I wonder if we could actually do more of knowledge sharing and experience to come up with maybe standards or guidance, right? That could be something to which all of these MDBs and evaluators, independent evaluators, national evaluators could subscribe up to. That could be the standard that we can use in various jurisdictions. Of course, I do understand there could be jurisdictional differences, but there could always be principles and commonalities that we can actually embed in such frameworks or guides. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't think there were another question, so we have a few minutes to just respond. 5 minutes left, so please, if you can get started. Maybe you, Danielle?
Yeah, I mean, transformation is a pretty big topic, I guess. And on a second topic, I mean, I think that would be great to have these things. I just want to highlight, actually, Dominic is sitting there, which is my partner in crime, and we realize you do need different financial products for different types of SMEs too. So we have ADB Ventures for more innovation focus, but Dominic, who set up ADB Ventures together with me, just created something called Frontier Fund, which is how do we support fast-growing SMEs in emerging markets, which needs different kind of products. So I think we need to be very cognizant around the market really needs in terms of financial products. And there's learning there across these institutions. On the transformation, obviously, if I knew who's going to transform, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now, right? I would probably be sitting on a beach somewhere in the Maldives, right? But I mean, I think these are the things where you don't really know exactly, right? Things takes time, and the general saying is that venture capital is the art of the upside. There's tons of risk. Everything can go wrong. People fall out. Founders hate each other. The market might disappear. Governments, change the policy. There are tons of risk. That's not the problem. The question is, how big could something be if it goes right? And how big impact? And it starts off, you have to address a big problem, right? If you're not addressing a big problem, it can't be transformative. But how it actually happens, only the entrepreneur knows, right?
Thank you. Maybe we'll go in order. Faraz, Alper, and Irene shortly, please.
Well, I think on transformation, the only thing I have to add is that one of the ways venture capital, I suppose, what looks out for transformation is, you invest in many different companies, and then hopefully you've identified one that is the next big thing, addressing a big problem. So, I suppose that's one way of looking at it in the crystal ball.
I will start with ESG, if that's okay. So it's essentially in EBRD, all those venture capital investments, they are subject to EBRD's, comply with EBRD's environmental and social performance requirements. They are not, they have to comply. There is no exception to that. The thing is that, as I said, it is at the time we invest, and 1 year later, these are like qualitatively different companies now. So it is, in that sense, yes, there is a issue there. And then how this will be addressed at this point in time, I don't know. Our evaluation, it will be soon published. We are making that point in the evaluation. About like this having like let's say a joint platform, or like some kind of like maybe a common way to speak about how to evaluate this type of like initiatives. I mean, why not? But I mean, but everybody lives in its own world. We are very much disconnected, I think, at the time these questions are asked. So I do not believe that it will be a priority of IFC, EBRD, or any other, honestly speaking. About the transformational change, I think there are two elements of it. One is the impact, the transformation that we create at the company level. And I think, and we are able to document it with the evaluations. At the system level, I agree with Faraz and Daniel. It is, I think, those who are willing to intentionally transform this ecosystem, they have to invest in every stage. Plus, they have to think much more about the policy work as well to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So it is, at this point in time, within the strategies that we have EBRD, we are much more focused on the financing end.
Thank you, Alper. And sometimes you have to create priorities yourself if they are not there yet. So let's be optimistic. Irene?
Something I noticed, actually, I thought that in our bank, we similarly were too busy in our private sector work to raise the head and talk to other people. And then I realized that our private sector teams were actually, with their managers, going on a number of visits. They were going to visit ADBs, PSOD, they were going to visit here and there. And I think sometimes we don't see what's happening because it's not what we're used to looking for. And I wondered if the private sector engages in a different way, and that was the comfortable way to join yourself up through those visits. But coming to the ESG point, similarly for IIB, we have one environmental and social policy that governs both sovereign and non-sovereign. Why I touched on some of the shift that's coming through in legal jurisdictions is because I think in the nature of the history of those environmental and social policies, they came out of the sovereign sector. They were initially in the 1970s a response to overlooking or poorly designing activities. You know, Narmada Dam would have been a classic one where 2,000 people's resettlement was overlooked. And so systems were put in place for sovereigns. Now, as we've moved to have sovereign and non-sovereign, the challenge for those environmental and social policies is how to cover both. And that's why I floated the balloon of we should keep an eye on what's happening in the true legal regulation of the private sector that's emerging around ESG in some of the jurisdictions.
Thank you very much. I think we've reached the end of this session. So I think we talked a lot about a lot of things, early engagement, and a lot of emphasis on the learning as a learning loop, capturing systemic impact of innovation, ESGs, the notion of uncertainty, but also how we can focus on the demonstration effects of more the portfolio perspective. And what could be a conclusion is that it's only the beginning of a discussion that we need to definitely continue. Collaboration is important, and I think we can investigate ways of how we could collaborate, not just among evaluators, but with you practitioners at an early stage without compromising our independence or without conflict of interest. I think that was a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much for all of your questions, and thank you to the panelists for their insights. Thanks a lot. Bye.